I loved when I watched when NWA had just come back, and I was like, "You have Austin Idol in your commercials. This is the best thing on the planet. I don't care what the in-ring work looks like. You got this." So.
Yeah, I mean, Austin we're really lucky because NWA is so focused on the legendary history of what we build our product on today. And we have some incredible people, Ricky Morton, Bobby Fulton, Austin Idol. These are people who have been so influential in the world of professional wrestling, specifically within the world of the National Wrestling Alliance, that for me, and these are the people I grew up watching. So I love when I get to see these icons and legends of our industry and have the opportunity to work with them. I mean, it's very much I can't believe this is my life situation. Like when I've gotten to work with Austin Idol in any capacity or even just share a dressing room with him because of the fact that this is legitimately the first person who made me love wrestling. And he knows that. And he's known that before I was ever with NWA. He read the article that I had written for HuffPost and had me on his podcast as a guest to talk about that and the kind of influence that he had in terms of making me fall in love with wrestling. And now to so many years later, be working with him or even sharing a dressing room minimally with him is just mind blowing.
Yeah, I imagine I see what the roster looks like for NWA and the people they bring in and out, and then the legends that they literally have just at their fingertips. And I'm just like, I can't imagine just rubbing shoulders. And you're backstage, like you said, you're a fan still because you're, I'm glad that you are still a fan because you're not numb to it. And you're like this, oh yeah, that's awesome. No big deal. What am I doing next? No, you're like, I'm still rubbing shoulders with the guy that inspired me to ever be into this entire world that is pro wrestling. And now NWA is still happening in the world of 2023. They killed it during the pandemic and then they've been doing great things ever since, and they're still showcasing and putting a spotlight on the legends while also showing what's coming up in the world of pro wrestling.
Absolutely correct. And I have people all the time who suggest that I should be working for a different company or I should aspire to work for a different company. And I understand that those individuals just want to see me succeed on the largest platform possible. But what I try and emphatically express to people on an ongoing basis is that the NWA is where I want to be. It's where I wanted to be from the beginning. I want to be in a company that we still bring in. I remember the first time my mom, as an example, the first time my mom ever came to be backstage at a show was when we did our television tapings in Tampa earlier this year. And so I bring her in and I'm introducing her to the people in my world. And there was a group of men sitting at a table and I walked her up to introduce her to them. And they were all so kind to her. And I was like, Mom, this is Mr. Bobby Fulton. Mom, this is Mr. Ricky Morton. This is Mr. Austin Idol. This is Raven. These are all people. And they were so kind to her, so nice to her. And these are people who she didn't know them from a hole in the ground. But I was like, Mom, each and every one of those people is a Hall of Famer. Every single one of them is a pioneer of this industry, and every single one of them at one time or another you've seen on our television set at home because those are people that I grew up watching. And they were all so gracious and so nice to her. And it was, I don't think that it's thought of as cool. I don't think it's thought of as maybe sometimes even appropriate. But I refuse to lose the fact that I am a wrestling fan. I don't want the industry and being involved in the industry to rob me of that. And when I see people out there like Tommy Dreamer, for example, who is unabashedly to this day still a pro wrestling fan and still kind of marks out over people that are true legends in our industry, it tells me that it's okay. I mean, I work with Dr. Tom Pritchard for sake. You know, like I love Dr. Tom Pritchard, and I can't believe I almost didn't include him in this conversation. These are people that are just wandering around in our dressing room. Medusa Michelli, Jazz. You know, these are genuine legends, and I tell my mom that at every opportunity. I get to work with real legends who made a name for themselves when I was much younger and just a fan of this industry, and it's a pleasure to get to work with them and call them my friends in most cases.
I would love to pick every single one of those people's brains because they have stories that people nowadays could not even imagine because of the things they had to go through and the roads they had to pave for other people to go down so that it is easier for them. But at the time, it was the toughest thing in the world. They're literally paving this road. Like, they're grinding it out and they're just absolutely killing it. Like, Jazz, first off, being a woman pro wrestler has not been an easy thing. It's been a sideshow thing forever. It was them and the little people for the longest time. It was like they were paired together and that's how you was sold an extra to a show. Or you have Medusa who the same thing, and then she goes over to Japan, kills it, comes back and does the exact same thing here. And then Dr. Tom Pritchard, he's not the tallest guy in the world. So back in the day, it was harder for him because of the fact of his size, but he's absolutely an amazing wrestler. And Kurt Angle wouldn't be the guy he is today if it wasn't for Dr. Tom Pritchard. Edge wouldn't be. Christian wouldn't be. There is the laundry list of names who wouldn't be the pro wrestler they are if it wasn't for Dr. Tom Pritchard. And then his brother, everybody's got an opinion about Bruce Pritchard at this age, but he has created and helped create a lot of talent and characters that people either love or hate one way or the other, but it's all coming under the Pritchard tree, so it's not a bad thing for pro wrestling.
No, and I think about some of the things that you pointed out there. I think about not very often because otherwise I think it would become overwhelming, but I think about those things for myself too. What I'm doing right now may not be the most impactful or the most beneficial, but I know for a fact that in 10 years, because I existed, somebody else will find an easier road for them to travel.
Now, I wanted to mention this and I wanted to bring this up. So, in a sense, your history of being in the pro wrestling industry goes back almost 100 years. So, the Exoticos in Lucha Libre started appearing back in the 1940s sometime. And then, however, men being in drag has dated back to not only the Greek theater, the Japanese kabuki, but also Shakespeare. Do you feel continuing this art of drag in pro wrestling, where do you feel your part is, and who do you feel that kind of inspired you? I mean, like you said, you've been watching this pro wrestling since the 80s. So, who kind of inspired you along the way when it came to maybe a drag character or just a character? I mean, like you said earlier, it's kind of like a superhuman, superpower kind of situation.
Well, yeah, what you mentioned is so true. Actually, people act like drag is so new right now, especially, they feel like the world is under attack by drag queens or whatever.
I want to get that later, but we're not getting into that right now.
I try to sidestep that because people who have that opinion, nothing I can say will change their mind. And it's it's nothing I will say, and it becomes exhausting to me. But the reality is that anybody who is familiar with the Shakespearean play, when those were written by William Shakespeare, it was illegal for women to act. So any role that was written for a woman was played by a man. And that is a proven fact. And it was the case for 100 years at least before women were even allowed to step onto a stage in that capacity. So, the original Juliet was a man. The original Lady Macbeth was a man. Whoever that person was initially was a man. And in Roman times and Greek times, all those Greek tragedies, it was a man playing that woman. So those are things that people fail to want to acknowledge or recognize, or maybe they're just not educated enough to know. But
Right.
when it comes to exoticos, we have seen that long and storied history of individuals in that role in lucha libre. It's not been something as prevalent or, as embraced in U.S. culture. So it puts me in a unique position because I am one of a very, very, very few people who does what I do in the United States. I would consider myself to be the only actual drag queen competing or performing in the United States in my role. There's a lot of people who are wrestlers who do makeup or things like that, but I come from the world of drag back into the world of wrestling. I started out in wrestling long before my first professional gig in wrestling was when I was 19, and I'm certainly not 19 now. So, there's a long history for me of having entered the world of wrestling, left, and come back as somebody different, both in terms of like my awareness of self as well as my awareness of the industry and how much more interesting my character is now than it would have ever been if I went with the schlock that was given to me when I was a 19-year-old kid. But the people who inspired me, I was always drawn to, utter showmanship. So an exotic Adrian Street, despite the fact that he was not part of my direct community, was a representation of my community, and I loved that. There are a lot of other people, but my greatest inspiration actually doesn't come from, I loved Gold Dust. I have tons of Gold Dust action figures. I thought that was very unique in its own right and problematic in a different capacity. But my inspirations come from the great women of our industry. And I look at people like Luna Vachon and Sherry Martel, my ultimate inspiration. I love Sherry Martel because Sherry is somebody who morphed herself to fit with whatever relationship she had, managerial or otherwise, on screen. And I look forward to having that opportunity as well. Like, the character that I've portrayed for over a year in the National Wrestling Alliance with Thrillbilly Silas Mason is a character that was geared and tailored for him. And it was geared and tailored towards that relationship that we had and expressed on screen. So when I move on to my next project with NWA, I think we'll see a different version of me there. So, in terms of inspirations, I draw many. Baby Doll, who's somebody I've gotten to work with as well at NWA, has constantly said to me that people did not talk about her nearly as much before I came onto the scene as they do now, and that's because I constantly mention Baby Doll as an inspiration. I mentioned Missy Hyatt in Dark Journey as inspiration. These great female personas that I loved so much, and we never got to see enough of in the day, but they all inspired me. And now as a manager and a valet, I hope to bring elements of each of those to life on screen at NWA, Game Changer Wrestling, top independent wrestling promotions coast to coast. Wherever I'm working, you'll get to see parts of those legacies that I think sometimes go unnoticed.
I love the use of Baby Doll because that's got that connection back to, I'm, out of the DFW area, and she was obviously a very big connection here in the local community when it came to pro wrestling. And like you said, it does, I didn't think about it until you said it, but like the Baby Dolls, like you said, Missy Hyatt, like they were still regional for the most part. Like Missy Hyatt was on WCW, which was on, Superstation TBS, but like how many people were really watching it? It's the amount of people watching now and like obviously in the Attitude Era are completely different from who were watching in the 80s and early 90s. Like those numbers were not even thought about and not even like nobody brings them up because
I'm not so sure about
that
because the reason I say that I don't think that that's true is because back in that generation, there were a far more limited